Okay, so I've had some emails and some comments and stuff. People asking me to name like some books that are good and so on. So in no real particular order, other than I think I've picked about 10 or 11 or 12 or so books that I think are worth reading. Um, the first two are books that I wrote, which I know sounds very arrogant or whatever, but the fact is, I'm going to say a little bit about every book. So while I'm talking, maybe now, get yourself a pen and a paper because it's quite late. I'm not going to type up all the books and who wrote them and everything. I will tell it on video. So if you got a pen and paper, you can write it down. And then you can go and get them if you want. So the first book that I recommend is the one that I wrote 24 years ago, which is called The Face on Mars. That's my name at the top there. Go on Amazon, you can find it. Now, the reason I recommend this is because it gives you a rundown on human history that you haven't had. It includes a little bit of everything on a lot of topics, from the rocket type of space program to the less known and hidden anti-gravity space program, to the inventions of Nikola Tesla, to the fact that you can trace the stuff in terms of hidden programs and so on. And it's really got a little bit of everything. It's got a lot of information on the face on Mars itself, on the pyramids, the work of Mar Carlotto and others, Nazi secret weapons. So it's got a lot of stuff, and it's packed full with like details, and on almost every couple of pages you've got footnotes, and some of the footnotes lead to other footnotes and to books, and there's a bibliography at the back. There's a lot of stuff. There's stuff on the pyramids, which very few people know about. There's an original photograph on the blog relating to the book. So if you go on my blog, which is gfilotto.com, in the gallery you'll see that there's like something like pictures for the face on Mars or something like that, and there's photographs there. One of them of the pyramid, of an item on the pyramid that I'd read about in Peter Lemesurier's book, The Great Pyramid Decoded, which is mentioned in here, and which I actually found. It's there. People said that Peter Lemesurier's book, The Great Pyramid Decoded, was nonsense, it wasn't real, and blah, blah, blah. But actually, it is real, and pretty much everything in Peter Lemesurier's book is accurate as far as I could tell when I went to see the pyramid myself. And I managed to find an engraving rather, in an area of the pyramid that he mentioned in his book. And it's really quite an interesting thing, because it's one of the few original inscriptions that nobody really knows where it came from or what it meant and so on. I was just trying to see whether, I couldn't remember whether I had a diagram of it in here or not, but anyway, it's on the blog. So like I said, this book has got a lot of stuff about a lot of different things. I mean, I'll just read you a couple of the chapters, headings, just to give you an idea. So, basic concepts about distance in space, interstellar travel, NERVA, which was a nuclear rocket-powered stuff where they'd done tests for it and would work. Other theories about space travel, the face on Mars and related objects, the Great Pyramid of Giza, Mars itself, what happened on Mars, Titus Bode, chaos theory, and Phaeton. Phaeton is the planet that would exist between Mars and Jupiter if it hadn't been broken up. Advancing the theory of war in interstellar origin, other ideas, so the Neanderthal problem, a tentative reconstruction of human origins, race memory, the principles of morphic resonance in nature, the place of science in the scheme of things, the origin of the ancients, and there's 3 different cases, conclusions, and then there's some appendixes for catastrophe in human and earth history, the gods and technology and mythology, technologically advanced items from ancient times, The Legend and Destruction of the Phaeton Object, Semitic Etymology in the Old Testament. And then there's book 2, which covers UFO phenomena, alien propulsion, the cover-up, and various loose ends. And that's in the original book, but which is all in here. And then there's additional, both before and after the original book. There's an introduction to the second edition, which this is. And then there's book 3, which is an overview of the face on Mars as a whole, and chapter by chapter updates and changes, and final thoughts. So it's a pretty heavy volume at 520 something pages, but I think it's worth it. And everybody that's read it has been pretty positive about it. Another book that I just recently finished, so you can look for my name again, you'll see it, it's called Believe. That one is kind of the opposite of this one. It's just a short treatise on Christianity, essentially. It's under 100 pages. It's got some references, but more than anything else, it's a view of what's true about Christianity, and it's mostly written for the war donkeys, you know, what the Bible called wild asses, which again, it's not rampant homosexuals, it's wild donkeys. Donkeys are notoriously unafraid of anything and quite recalcitrant and will fight just about anything. So wild donkey type people, you know, unafraid men who think that Christianity is bullshit, like I used to for most of my life. It's a good little book for you. And then in no particular order, books that I've found very useful are, this is Gorin no Sho. You can't see the title page because it's an old book with, just see if it's got a title page here. No, it doesn't. Anyway, this is called Gorin no Sho, which is Japanese for a book of 5 rings. Maybe you can see, it's very faded now, there you can see. By Miyamoto Musashi. If you get this book, get the translation by Victor Harris. Don't get any other translations because they're crap compared to Victor Harris. Victor Harris is kind of one of those freaks that studies one thing to the death, and he is very eminently placed to translate Japanese works. So, Gorin no Sho, a book of 5 rings, get the translation by Victor Harris. I find this far superior to Sun Tzu. I've read Sun Tzu and I find it a little bit banal in certain ways, while this, although this is harder to appreciate probably, especially if you haven't had martial arts training yourself, if you haven't been involved in some serious stuff yourself, if you haven't been involved in real fights, this may seem somewhat abstract, but I found it very to the point. Then a book that I suggest everybody reads is the Iliad. And, you know, obviously, if you've read the Iliad, you probably want to go on to read the Odyssey as well. Now, the Iliad is not a book that you can read on the train on the way to work. This is a book where you need to be on holiday for a month and read it without worries, which is very difficult to do these days. But if you read this, the sense of true life, of true wonder, of the mysticism mixed in with the reality, mixed in with the hardcore, ugly truth of the human side, it's all in here. And it's, you know, it's a reason. There's a reason it's the oldest classic in the world. I particularly quite like this edition, the Oxford's World's Classics. It is an incredible piece of work, and I suggest everybody reads it. Again, as I said, in no particular order, the ESP Enigma, so the scientific case for psychic phenomena, and there's the author, it's Diane Hennessy Powell, MD, she's a doctor. Very good book because it gives you scientific work that's been done, you know, repeatable work that's been done on extrasensory perception, which I've had several of these sort of things happen to me in my life, so I was interested, and this is one of the better books that I've read on the subject. This is another book that is kind of brilliant and frustrating. It's called Lost Science by, I think, of Greek origin, if I remember right, a guy called Jerry Vassilatos. That's his name, Lost Science. Incredible book. And it's got quite small writing, chock full of really interesting stuff. Sort of frustrating because of how much has been lost in a way. Very interesting though. Then The Science Delusion, which is sort of an updated version of Rupert Sheldrake. Rupert Sheldrake is the guy who wrote A New Science of Life, the only book written by a scientist which has been, which scientists, in theory, scientists have asked was due for book burning. And basically, Rupert Sheldrake is a real scientist, and he's the guy who basically discovered morphic resonance, which is a very interesting concept, which, by the way, I talk about in The Face on Mars as well. This is his later book, wrote a lot more recently than The New Science of Life. But The New Science of Life is also a brilliant book, so, you know, whatever this guy writes is pretty interesting. This, of course, is his response to in my opinion, the fraud, Richard Dawkins, who I believe is a plagiarist who stole the work of Richard Simeon, the guy who wrote the original, The Meme, in 1905. And I believe that Richard Dawkins, or Dick Dawkins as I like to call him, I believe he plagiarized the work of Richard Simeon from 1905. That's my belief. Okay, he can deny it or whatever, but I think that's what he did. And this is Rupert Sheldrake's response, pretty much, to Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. Very interesting book, especially when you keep it in context that today we have final proof that more than 50% of so-called peer-reviewed scientific experiments are not repeatable. In other words, they're so badly done or so fraudulently done that if you try and repeat those experiments with the same conditions and so on, you don't get the same results or anywhere near. It's literally flipping a coin is safer than trusting science in the current day and age. Then here's another plug for myself, you know, Systema. If you're interested in martial arts, I've done martial arts all my life. I did karate from when I was pretty much born because my dad was heavily into it. And I trained, you know, for at least 25 years in karate on and off, and various other things. And then I met these Russian guys who could do what the hell they wanted with me. So I started training with them. And then after a while, they said I was good enough to be an instructor. I didn't ask for it. They just kind of said, start teaching, which I did, although I was always more willing to train rather than teach. And anyway, so that's what it's called. It's Systema, the Russian martial system, and again, still my name. This, by the way, when you get this, you also get access to 40 videos that are online that relate to the book. This book has been very interesting for me and very useful, and I've had it for over 20 years. I got it at a sale, I think, but it's a very interesting book to have, especially if you're a young guy. You know, if you're in your 20s, get this book. Get this book and use it a lot. Read through it, refer to it, you know. Dictionary of Word Origins and the histories of over 8,000 words explained. There's UK versions, there's US versions, so you can get it on Amazon or whatever again. And forget who wrote it. Let's see if there's a name. Clearly and entertainingly written, and it is both clearly and entertainingly written. John Ito, there you go, that's the author. Very good book, very good reference book. And this book I've talked about before. This is The Crusades, Iron Men and Saints by Harold Lamb. If you can get a paper copy, I would suggest you do so, although it's an old book. It was written in 1930. Brilliant. The research in it is amazing. Documentation in it is amazing. So that's my list of, let's see, how many have I got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, some books that I don't have because I either lent them out or are packed away, or I forgot where I put them. One book, if you're interested in Nikola Tesla, which you should be, because everybody should know who Nikola Tesla is, get the book Prodigal Genius by O'Neill. That is probably the biography on Tesla. Although I'm reading a book called My Inventions, which is the autobiography of Nikola Tesla, which I didn't know existed. A very small book, absolutely fascinating. I'm only on like the first 3 pages because, again, it's one of those books you want to read on a summer's day when you've got nothing else in your head. And I have very few of those these days. Then I'm going to mention a book that, I don't have here. I've sent it to my dad, I think, along with 17 other boxes of books. It's a book that's been criticized for being fantastic, full of lies, errors, and blah, blah, blah. And maybe it is. I don't know. But it's a fascinating book. It's called The Spear of Destiny by a guy called Trevor Ravencroft, if I remember right. And I have been sort of fascinated with the Nazi regime in a horrid fashion. In other words, not fascinated in a good way. Horrified at how can a whole country become so completely insane. Since I was 7, because that was my project in geography. When I was 7 years old, the teacher gave every kid in the class a country to do a project on. I got Germany, and you can't really sort of do in Germany without talking about the Second World War and the Holocaust and death camps and so on. Although I'll mention another book I've just started to read, which is sort of interesting. The fact is that because of that, I could never get my head around, like, how is that even possible? How can a whole people become so evil? And as I got older, I kept watching, I've pretty much watched all the documentaries on Nazism that you could find. I've read a lot of books on it. And I still could never fathom exactly how this sort of happened. When I read The Spear of Destiny, for the first time, a click sort of happened. And it's the mysticism part in it, which might all be manufactured lies. I don't know. But it's the first time that I sort of thought, oh, wait a minute. Now this is starting to make sense. Because I think the only way that you can explain how people could become so insane to a certain degree is by referring to something that is outside of the purely mechanical, materialistic world. Although it might be very well rooted in it, I think there is a metaphysical element to humanity that allows for such levels of brutality or heroism as well, something deeper than just our flesh and bone body lets us do these things and somehow gets these sort of situations to happen. So The Spear of Destiny, very, very interesting book by Trevor Ravencroft. There's other books that are very interesting on the subject of the Nazis, of course. A particularly interesting one are these two, although I do believe there is some misinformation in here, not intentional misinformation. This one here, they're quite hard to get. Adolf Hitler and the Secret of the Holy Lands. So this was written by Colonel Howard A. Buchner and Captain Wilhelm Bernhardt. Wilhelm Bernhardt is a pen name. And it's the pen name of one of the men that was in one of the submarines that appeared at Mar del Plata a few months after the Second World War ended. And then this is the follow-up, Hitler's Ashes, again by the same people. I do believe there's misinformation in here, because basically what they're saying is that the ashes of Hitler end up being in Antarctica and they got buried there by some loyal ex-Nazis that did a mission in the 70s and so on. I don't believe that. I believe that was cover for what really is in Antarctica, which I believe the Nazis did have bases there, and you know, my fiction books get into the speculation of what could be real or not real there. So that's basically it. Of course, you know, the Bible, that goes without saying. And there's another book which I'll mention because it is interesting. It's called Hands of Light. And it basically, if you read through this, there's some exercises. You can end up seeing auras, but I also teach that in the Systema book and the videos that go with it. I explain about seeing auras and also explain about short-range telepathy. There's a video, in fact, where two brothers, they didn't know what I was going to make them do. They didn't know what the exercise was going to be. And I made them do it, and you can see it on the video. The video is completely spontaneous. It's not acted out. It's not fake. And short-term, you know, short-distance telepathy works. And you can train yourself to be able to pick up stuff from people, you know, which is part of Systema training, of the original Systema training. You know, what they do now, I don't know. You know, now they just tell you that you're a Russian ninja, I suppose. There's a lot of people that are... It was already happening when I was teaching that quite a lot of Systema instructors were just being given diplomas and, you know. Anyway, whatever. I don't know. I've been out of that for a couple of years now, so who knows. And that's basically it. So I hope you enjoy the books that I've mentioned. It's quite a bit of reading. You know, if you get all the books I've mentioned, you're probably going to be busy for, you know, a few months probably. And some of these books you can read a few times over before you get to the end of it. Anyway, it's pretty late, so good night, and I hope you enjoyed the list of books.